For those who are new or who just arrived, do you all have Chrome installed?
Cool.
Do you all have a text editor like Sublime or Notepad++?
Cool.
Do you all have Python installed?
Yep.
Okay.
We'll just be using Python to run a local web server. Yeah.
Do you guys want the light turn off or should I switch on? Is this bad? Yes.
Yeah.
Cool.
Do I turn on the light too?
What was it? Okay.
Okay, it's 6:10 now,
Yeah.
so I guess we'll get started.
Cool.
And-
So thank you guys for coming.
Yeah, thanks for coming. So we are members of Hackers at Berkeley, and I am Tak. My name is TAK, and
I'm Ajay.
yeah. So welcome to the JavaScript Workshop. And before we get started, I'll do like a quick show of hands. So how many of you guys have some JavaScript experience before? Okay, cool. How many of you guys know about HTML and CSS?
How many of you guys have programming experience in other languages like Python?
Like Python or Java?
Okay, great.
Cool. Okay, that should like fit you guys well.
Yeah.
And then so to get started, please pull this repo if you know like how to use Git. If you don't know it, we have like a README file that can tell you about that. And also you can download the file as zip. Let me show you guys real quick. So if you know how to use Git, just clone this URL here. It says here, and then if you are not sure like how to use Git, then there's a button here that says download zip, and the URL is here.
Hey,
Hey, welcome. Yeah. So it's a Google short link that says PC, capital F, small f, capital V, and capital E.
And by the way, all these slides are on the Facebook group, so if you want to follow along or like actually click on the hyperlinks, you can do that. You can pull it up on your own computer. We'll give you guys about 5 minutes to get the repo ready. We'll go around and check, make sure everyone has it.
Yeah.
Just ask us if you have any questions.
Mhm.
And make sure when you download the zip, like just extract it so that you can use it. Hi, welcome.
Yeah, welcome to JavaScript Workshop.
For the two of you guys who just walked in, we're just cloning this repository for the tutorial, so go ahead and do that.
Where are the slides?
The
Oh.
slides are on the Facebook group.
So
Yeah.
yeah. Also, like if you already have like the GitHub repo, you can look at it here. It says slides for this workshop. You can find here. There's also like a link to the slides there as well. Cool.
Who doesn't have the starter code yet? Okay, cool.
Yeah, please like copy down this Git repo link.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, since most of you have it, we'll move on. You won't need the starter code until like a few minutes later, so don't worry if it's still downloading or cloning.
Okay, so to get started, please have Google Chrome installed, and if you have like Google Chrome, you can see like there's a little select option there. You can open it up and look at more tools, and inside that tab, you can see developer tools. Now, once you have like developer tools open, there's like a variety of options, and please choose console. And so this console is a quick JavaScript interpreter. You can use that to like work with the code that will be like running in this.
If you don't want to see the errors of that come on Google's code, what you can do is just go ahead to about blank and open a blank page, and then open up the developer console from there. It's just about :blank, and you just get a clean.
Yeah, and if you like already have Node.js installed, you can also like just use Node to run your file. Or we provide like 2 links to an online JavaScript interpreter. The first one is jsrunner.herokuapp.com. I built this like simple thing, and then another one is repla.it. It has like an online interpreter for like almost all interpreted languages.
All of these do the same thing. You don't have to have all of them. Just one of them is fine to follow along with the examples.
Yeah, and like
I would say that Replit is probably the easiest to use, but you can also use the Chrome templates.
Cool.
Or the thing that I talked about.
Yeah, and just make sure like you have a comfortable text editor you can work with, and please have Python 2.7 or 3 installed, because we'll be using that as like a static server.
So we'll give you a few minutes to get that figured out. Just ask if something is not working.
And AJ, do you want to like give a quick demo of like the final project we'll be working on?
Sure. So what we're going to do, or how this workshop is structured, is that the first hour or so will be an actual tutorial on JavaScript that Top will go through. So like what is it, and then what are some of its nuances. The second hour will be actually building a little project, and this is the project we'll be building. How many of you guys have used imgear.com or know what it is? Okay, well for those of you who don't know, it's just an image sharing service. And we're going to build a project where we can search it with our voice. So for example, dog. We should get pictures that are tagged as dog. So we'll be building this like towards the end of the tutorial. Don't worry, we're not going to do any scary math to do the voice search. Chrome handles that, but we're going to be using some JavaScript to build this. Yeah, so does everyone have an interpreter that they can use? And does everyone have the repository in some way or the other?
All right.
Who
cool.
doesn't have either of those things? Okay, great. We can get started then.
So we'll get started by talking about a brief history of JavaScript. So what is JavaScript? JavaScript is the language of the web. It is high-level, dynamic, untyped, interpreted programming language. It has nothing to do with Java. It's actually pretty close to Lisp, but like the syntax looks really like Java or C. And it used to be like only a sandbox language that only runs on your browser, which means it has no I/O access, and like it cannot like draw images or like read file or write to file on your computer. But nowadays, like people are developing like tools for you to like do a lot of cool stuff. Like, and also there's like standalone JavaScript interpreters like Node.js.
You guys have heard of Node.js? Yeah.
Yeah.
So Node.js is JavaScript on the server side. So now it's not only a client-side language. You can actually use it as a full-stack language. You can even program robots with JavaScript, and if you're interested, you can look up NodeBots. But yeah, knowing this language is really helpful because it's becoming more and more prevalent as web technologies get more and more ubiquitous. So it's a good thing to learn and be familiar with.
And this guy originally at Mozilla developed the first version of JavaScript language in 1995 within only 10 days. So it was a little bit like kind of rushed compared to like other language like C or Java. So some part of the language have some design issues. So as we walk through this workshop, we'll try to help you guys like avoid some like weird or usage of JavaScript that might cause trouble. And this book actually talks a lot about like how to carefully use JavaScript, and it says like JavaScript is like a highly expressive language that's buried under a steaming pile of good intentions and blunders. So why do we want to learn JavaScript? So firstly, Google Chrome's V8 JavaScript engine makes JavaScript execution very fast. It's in fact like even faster than Python. And JavaScript is getting more and more popular. Like it's the fundamental component of web applications. It contains like lots of open libraries on GitHub. And nowadays there's the popular standalone JavaScript framework Node.js, making JavaScript a full stack language. And it has a huge developer community, which means that like if you run into trouble, like I don't know why this doesn't work, you can just Google it and like there will be already like a lot of posts on Stack Overflow. So it's definitely worth our time to learn JavaScript. And let's take a quick look at the JavaScript syntax. So this is like a really short hello world example. Console.log string hello world : please always put colon like at the end of line. If you don't do that, your code still executes, but sometimes it will cause trouble. So please do that. And like doing print statements is actually like the best way to debug your JavaScript code, because not like all the browsers have like a debugger or fancy things like that. So let's talk about variables. So because JavaScript is untyped, you declare a variable through the var keyword. And there are like a lot of like built-in types defined in JavaScript. There's Boolean type like true and false. There's numbers like 5. JavaScript numbers has only one type. It's the number. It's actually represented by a double floating point number. So there are no like integer or float type in JavaScript. Like all the numbers are the same. And for string, you can use double quote or like single quote. They both mean string. And null and undefined are two special values in JavaScript. A null just means nothing, and if you like declare a variable without assigning a value to it, or if you are accessing like a unexisting property of an object, it will always give you undefined. And this is like a object literal. It looks kind of like a Python dictionary thing. This is how we'll be mainly using, the main way we'll be declaring like objects. It contains like key value pairs. You can put quotes around the key, or you can just not do that. Most of people just not do that. And then the property, the value can be anything, like a string or a number. Hey, this is the JavaScript Workshop. So,
Okay.
yeah, cool. And then for array, you can just put anything into the array. It's not restricted to like only one type, like Java does. Okay, do we have any like questions regarding this slide? Cool. So, can you see this text, or is it like too small? Awesome. So, for JavaScript operators, it's very similar to Java. The double ampersand just means and. The vertical bar means or. The exclamation mark means not. And then there's one thing we need to like be careful. that is the double equal sign and triple equal sign. So in JavaScript, the double equal sign does auto typecasting, which means like the number 5 is equal to the string 5. Like it automatically converts the type for you, and this statement will return true. So if we want to avoid this behavior, we'll have to use the triple equal sign. That's like the difference. And then for numbers, as we said before, there are no type, but you can still use like the modulus operator, and you can use plus plus or plus equals. Those are all supported. And then for string concatenation, you can just add string together, and if you add string to like a number or other things, it's gonna like convert that into a string and append it at the end. And to convert between numbers and strings, there is a built-in function called parseInt. Let's actually try that out. Okay, about blank. Okay. So the parseInt function takes a string and it extracts an integer out of it. For example, if I have 5, what I get back is 5. If I have like 5.3, I still get back 5. And if I have a string, it looks like $5 for dinner. That's still 5. And if like in the string there's not even a number in it, it's just gonna return none, not a number. And one thing to notice is that it doesn't throw any exception. It only returns like this. So as we are like writing JavaScript code, like we really need to be careful, because usually the interpreter will try not to throw an exception because it does not want to like your website to just stop responding. So it just returns like this thing, which might makes the code that follows this line crash. So we need to be careful. And also like there's another function called parseFloat, which just parses float. Yeah. So
sorry, just a small thing. So if you try to enter a string that's a floating point value and you use parseInt, it'll return the integer, and I think it floors it. So just be careful if you do have a decimal to use parsefloat.
Yeah, and
we have an example of that. So
yes.
yeah, so if you have a string 52.3 and use parseInt, it'll return 52. But if you use parsefloat, you'll get 52.3 as the output.
And to convert numbers to string, you can either add it to a string, or you can just say 52 number dot to string. So there are like predefined methods on numbers. Okay, do we have any questions regarding this slide? Cool.
Is everyone able to like try out these examples on the interpreter if they wish to?
Yeah, please like try these and see if anything looks weird. You can just ask us. And then we'll talk a little about objects. So an array is also an object, and you can access the element of the array using like the square bracket, which is pretty similar to all the other programming languages. And unfortunately, there's no like array slicing or something like that. But there are like a lot of helpful methods defined to do that. And you can use like a variable to access an element in the array. And if you ever put like an index that's bigger than the length of the array, for example, in this case, the array length is 4 and x is 3. Here is x using the 4th element of the array. Since the index starts at 0, normally if we're working with other programming languages, it will throw like an array index out of bound exception, right? In this case, it's just going to return undefined and nothing would happen. So that's also like a one special thing in JavaScript. It's just not going to give you an error.
Also note that the array is untyped. In this example, they're all integers, or what looks like integers, but you can actually fill an array with any type you want. So we could have had one and then string and then some object in it as well. You'll rarely see that because good design is to have like the same type of data type in an array, but you can do that. And also note that in some more strictly typed languages, you would have the array's data type like next to it. That it's just defined like a regular variable. So
Okay, and for objects, this is like object literal, and you can put quotes surrounding the key. Not doing that is fine. You can have like a number as the key. At the end of the day, it's gonna all convert these into strings. So if you put a number here, it's actually the string 1. And you can use the dot syntax to get a value out of the object. For example, object.name, in this case is AJ. And if we do something like object.y, it's undefined because we don't have like a key is y. What we have to do is we can use the square bracket syntax. So there are like 2 ways defined to access like the elements in an object. And object.3, in this case, the interpreter will really throw an error. It says like you should not like put a number here. And if you do object 1 or object string 1, it both gives back this array. So it's gonna automatically convert the type for you. And
objects in JavaScript are commonly known as associative arrays. So this syntax, there's a reason it looks like an array accessor because it is an array. So you can access it using the square brackets just as you would normally. And this type of method is helpful because if the key that you're looking for is a variable, then you can just pass that variable into here, and because you can't call a variable using the dot syntax.
Okay, hopefully like we won't raise any confusions. And lastly, we can use the in operator to see if a key is in an object.
Anyone have any questions on objects or arrays?
Yeah.
Are you able to use object.1? Would they give you the array?
You mean object.1?
Yeah.
No, because the interpreter would deal at you and say that's not a valid JavaScript in like a syntax. Yeah. This line of code will crash because of the interpreter. It's not because of like the key 3 is not defined in the object. Yeah. Any more questions? Okay. So there are like a lot of built-in modules and methods in JavaScript. What is it?
We can probably just talk about the array methods.
Yeah, I'll go over really
Yeah.
quick. So like most of these are defined in almost all the browsers, so you can use them safely. Some methods are like only defined in Chrome, some are only defined in Firefox. So like as a JavaScript developer, especially like a web developer, we gotta be like really careful about like versioning or things like that. And then so math module have a method random. You can just try it out by typing what are these? Math.random. It's gonna give you like a random number. And so we learn about console.log as the print. There are also like console.warn, console.info, console.error. Those are like essentially the same thing. And object have methods like toString, and the array methods and string methods are most of the methods that you will be working with. And three of the most important methods are push, pop, and shift. So the push method for array is similar to add for Java or append for Python, which just put an element to the end of this array. And pop just removes the last element out of the array and return that. What shift does is it removes the first element of the array and shift the array left by 1. So
Isn't the default pop?
oh, you mean like the pop or shift? So pop removes the last, shift removes the first. Yeah. And if you like, for example, if you only use push and pop for an array, it feels like a stack. And if you use push and shift, it's kind of like a queue, right?
And all these methods will return the new array.
Return the element.
Oh yeah, we'll return the element.
Yeah, cool. And for string, these three methods does almost the same thing. And the trim method is just gonna remove the trailing and like the spaces like before the string and after the string. And by the way, W3 School and Mozilla Developer Network have like really nice documentation on that. Let me show you real quick. The link is w3schools.com/jsref, and you can see like there's JavaScript reference for string number, regular expression, boolean, array, date, everything. And there are like a lot of browser object reference, HTML DOM reference, and like all the element references. So this is like really convenient if you want to like look up things. And do we have any questions?
So if I have an array and I call it object, in order to pop it, I would do object on top.
Okay, cool. Return full screen. Okay, so let's talk about JavaScript functions. So there are two ways of declaring a function in JavaScript. One way is to use the function keyword followed by the function name and parentheses, arguments, and then the function body. Another way is to say var, the function name, equals, this is like an anonymous function or like a function expression. And in this case, you don't really need like a function name. And there are some like small difference between these two, but like for now, for the purpose of this workshop, you can treat them as the same. And the if-else block is essentially the same as that in Java. You can omit the curly braces if there's only one line in if. Otherwise, you can put the curly braces there. And you can declare recursive functions in JavaScript as in any other programming languages. As an example, you can see like factorial and fib. And in JavaScript, there's this like question mark operator, which is, it's not like scary. It's just the expression before the question mark is going to evaluate it. If it is true, it's going to return the first expression before the colon. If it's false, it's going to return the second. It's kind of like the Python if-else thing. And
this is called a tertiary operator, if you want to look it up.
Yeah.
So, and it's in most other languages as well.
Yeah, like Java. And a for loop just look like this, and a while loop look like this. It's very similar to the other programming languages, except we need to be careful that this is var, it's not int. If you like write Java a lot, you might just write int I equals, that will crash our code. And there's also like higher order function. If you have taken 61A, you know that. And the try, catch, and throw is also supported in JavaScript. We won't be talking that in depth. And there's also like the switch.
And I like to point out that you can pass functions as a parameter to another function. So for example, this filter function, you can see that it accepts fn. So you would call filter with an array and then another function. And sometimes people like to define it, the function that gets passed in this way so that it's very clear. So you would type in like array, like an actual array, and then sum as a parameter. But note that it also works if you define the input function this way as well. So they're very similar. And then you can see that this fn is being used inside.
So
any questions on how functions work?
Okay. So a function is in fact an object in JavaScript. function can be passed to other functions as parameters, function can be returned by another function, function can themselves have like their own attribute. For example, let's do a quick example. Okay. Oh. So if we declare a function a and it does nothing but just return a. So now we have this function a. And then you can say something like a.name is equal to tag. This will work, and if you really say a.name, it does print out. Oh, I guess in this case,
It's a reserved.
yeah, name is reserved. So let's try another example, like hello. Now if we do that, yeah, that would be tag. So functions are like objects, and functions themselves also have method. For example, you can call toString on a function. And these three, we won't go over that in detail. And functions create a new scope or a frame. This behavior is very similar to Python. So you can draw like environment diagrams for JavaScript. And the only difference is that all the variables from the parent frame are in fact like changeable inside the child frame. It's like you're declaring everything outside non-local. And functions without return statements would just by default return undefined. So do we have any questions for that? Okay. So let's try a simple example. So please declare a function map that takes an array and a function. It applies the function to each item in the array and returns a new array of the results. So that's like the map function.
We'll go back to the first slide where it has links to online interpreters and how to run your code. So yeah, so if you want to do this really quickly, you can go to repl.it and you'll get an online interpreter for JavaScript. If you already have a text editor or like Node or something, feel free to use that.
Yeah.
You can even do this in the Chrome console, but making it multi-line is pretty annoying. So we would recommend using one of these things.
Yep. And
Yeah, we'll give like 5 minutes for this, and we'll walk around and see if anyone needs help.
yep.
We'll give you 2 more minutes, and we'll go over the answer to that. Okay, we'll
Cool.
start going over the answer if you.
And anyone done with that? Anyone done with that? Cool. Shall we try to use like code-share?
I think we can start on.
Okay.
this part. Anyone want to do it themselves? If you've already gotten the answer.
Just use the original map function built in.
Oh yeah, you could do that, but
You can do that too.
yeah.
Okay, so what you can do is first you can create an array that to be returned, which essentially means you can create a new array. One way to do that is to say like, for example, result is equal to an empty array. This is just like an empty square bracket, which means like an empty array. And then you can use a for loop to loop through the elements inside the original array. So what we can do is we say var I is equal to 0, I less than array dot length I plus plus. This is like very similar to Java syntax. And first we want to take out the ith element of the array, right? And then we want to apply function on that. So we use fn. Oh. And after that, like we want to put this inside result, right? So what we'll do is we say result.push this, right? And then all we need to do is return result. So
Anyone got this answer?
okay, cool. So do we
Do you
have
guys
like
have questions on this?
okay?
Yeah.
Can you modify the array while looping through it?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
you can-
But
So if you did array I is equal to fn array I,
Yeah.
then you can modify the array, and then you wouldn't have to push the result because you're modifying it in place. Then you would just return the original array.
yeah,
Yeah.
but one thing is like we are creating like a new array, so we don't really want to like modify the original one. But
But you
That-
can.
but that will it certainly works. So let's go to slide. Yeah, or as we see in the previous slide, like map is a predefined function. You can just do this like in one line, but that would be like cheating. So okay, so we'll be going this example really quick. So can anyone tell me like if we call mystery1 like this and we console.log the result, like what will we see in the interpreter? Anyone have any idea? If we do this, like what will we see in the interpreter or like in the console? It's like a higher order function thing.
Are you guys familiar with this syntax? Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, we can go over the answer.
Yeah. So in this case, if we call mystery1, it's going to declare x and then return a new function. And we immediately call that function. It declares x in this scope and console.log x. So what we should see is we see like 6 get printed out. And because this function has no return statement, it will return undefined. So the last line of this code should print out undefined. So if we do this, what we should get is 6 and undefined. Is that what we expect? Okay, cool. So now that's like almost all the things you need to know about JavaScript. That will be enough to get us start to look at something more advanced. It's called the document object model. This thing has something to do with HTML. It's a way for JavaScript to manipulate HTML. And let's have AJ talk about that.
Sure. So how many of you guys know HTML and CSS? So you guys are aware that there's elements, there's IDs, classes, etc., right? And the point of JavaScript initially was to manipulate those elements and make them do stuff. Because HTML is a dumb language, right? It's a markup. But you can't even call it a language because it doesn't have any logic. So JavaScript allows us to inject it with like all of this capability. and we're going to learn how to do that today. So the document object model is a general name for all of the HTML elements and the CSS classes that define them. And the document object model is essentially a tree because you have elements nested within each other and elements within those. And we have ways in JavaScript to quickly and easily traverse that tree and retrieve elements that we want to modify. And not only can we modify the elements, we can also listen to events of certain elements. For example, an input field would have like an on change, and whenever the input field changes, we can apply a function. Or when a button is clicked, we can apply a function. So all of those things are also part of the DOM.
Okay, so we'll be covering like a basic example, which is a to-do list app. So let's write a basic to-do list generator application. When the user enters the task content and click the button Add, a new list item should be dynamically generated at the last of the list. So
I think at this point it would be helpful to actually get your text editor out because Replit doesn't have like HTML or anything. So if you open up Sublime or Notepad++, just open up our JS Workshop repository, and you should get two files, index.html and index.js. We'll give you a minute to get that set up. Let us know if you run into any trouble.
yeah.
Oh, and the file is called to-do.
So make it bigger. So this is what it should finally looks like. It contains like an input box and the add button. If I say something like go to the JS workshop and click add, oh, this is like an original one. Let me open the solution one.
Yeah, all of our examples have a solution version of them with all the code like written in it. These are just the starter boilerplate codes.
Cool. And it should like generate a new list item and clean this field. You can also do something like finish homework. Yeah. Oh, that's bad. Anyways, so.
Does everyone have those two files opened up? Okay, great.
Okay, so we'll be covering that step by step. So first, let's take a look at index.html. So we'll talk briefly about the HTML thing. So this just declares that this file is HTML, and all the HTML code is enclosed inside this HTML tag. It contains like the start tag and the end tag. That's the HTML syntax. And the meta just defines the character set to be UTF-8, and this title is in fact the title here. You can see like that says to do. And then we have this input tag that says ID equals content. So we'll see later why that ID is useful. And this button has the text add inside, and it listens to an event called onClick. And whenever onClick happens, it calls the function add. So you can also omit this semicolon if you want. And we'll have this UL. UL means unordered list. And we will be inserting list elements inside it to generate our list.
And note that it also has an ID attribute.
Yeah, because we want to be working with that in JavaScript. And finally, the script tag just include our index.js to the HTML page.
And it's similar to an import. So if you have multiple JavaScript files, you would just repeat this and change the source.
Okay, so as we can see that onClick calls the function add. So what we would essentially do is we need to write out this function add. So what should be like the first thing we do to like create the list? Anyone have any idea? Like what should be the like
First input tag. is independent to the unread list.
Yep,
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
That should
So
be like the idea behind it.
So the first part that he said was to parse the input text. And the way we do that is we query the DOM for the input tag, for the input element, then get its value. So
Yeah. So we want to like read the text inside the input tag. And let's actually look at the DOM reference here. As we can see, it's the w3school.com JS ref. And at here, we have HTML DOM reference DOM document. If we open that up, we should see like a list of functions that we can call on the DOM object. This object DOM is already predefined, so you can use it. And here we can see that we see an useful function called document.getElementById. So as we can see that here we have the input and it has an ID. So by calling this function, we should be able to get the input tag. So let's do that. Document.getElementById. And the ID is content. Is that right? That's right. Okay. Now, this getElementById would return the element, but we want the text instead of the element. So the way we extract the text out of this element is use the attribute .value. If you are curious, like why this have this .value thing, and you can also look that up on the W3C website. And here, this one line of code would get what's inside this input tag. And now, as we recall that there's a function defined on JavaScript string, it's the trim function. Does anyone remember what that does? Trim? Okay.
Use the space.
Yeah. So it removes the space, like at the beginning, at the end of the string. So we will also want to do that. And let's assign it to a variable called content.
and notice that at each before each dot, this variable, it's a different type of object. So for example, document.getElementById content, that by itself returns an HTML element. But then when we do .value, it's now a string, and then .trim is also a string. So in the end, content is a string.
Yeah, so content is a string. And now we have like the string we want.
So how to convert it to an HTML only?
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
that's the next step right now.
okay, so we also want to check to see if it's empty, right? If it's empty, we should just do nothing, right? So we can just do it this way. It's because like an empty string is a falsy value in JavaScript. Or like if you just want to be safe, you can just do something like .length is greater than 0. Like either way works. So just use the way that makes sense. Okay. And now we know that content is not empty. The next thing we should do is we should construct like a list element. So anyone remember like the normal way to declare a list item inside a unordered list?
Using just HTML.
Just HTML? Anyone? Yes.
Right?
So the way we do that is to declare an li item, and we say something like hello. If we do that this way, then let's open it up. This is what we see. It has this punch line and then hello. So essentially what we want is we want to dynamically generate this and put that after what's originally inside. So how do we do that? Well,
In the chat.
yes.
Right.
So first of all, we need to create an element, which is defined here. It creates an element node. So let's use that. Document.createElement. Now, what element do we want? We want li element. So this one line of code just creates an li element. And let's call that li element. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to put text inside it, right? We want to put content inside this li element. And actually, like everything in document has to be like an HTML element. So what we essentially want to do is we want to do something like this. We need to create a text node, and we want to put this text node inside the element we just created. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So now we want to do this. Text node is equal to document.create text node.
Why don't you just set inner text to the value?
Yeah, setting inner text, setting inner HTML would also be a way to work that out, but it's not supported by all of the browsers. So to get like the best compatibility, we should like use the methods that's defined like standardly on W3 School. But nowadays, like most browsers just support that. But I just want to like give us like an example of what we should do to support like the old browsers. And by calling create text node, now this time we can construct it with a string. So the content is what we get from the input box, and we put that inside the text node. Now we have a text node that contains this string.
So at this point, we simply have this. We have an li element with the text node inside. What
Yeah.
we want to do next is to put this entire thing inside our unordered list.
Yeah, so li element dot append child. Now you might wonder like what that is. Let's go back. So HTML DOM reference has DOM document and DOM elements. So if we go to DOM elements, we can see that there's a method defined on the element. It says append child. It adds a new child node to an element as the last child node. It's just like append to an array. So we want to use that function. We say li element dot append child text node. Now we have our text node inside the li element, and we want to put that li element into the UL. So the way we do that is we say document.get element by ID. Now what's the ID for the UL? We can say the ID for the UL is list, right? So it's here, says list. So we want to get that element. After we get that element, we append child. That's li element. So now we put text node inside li element, and we put li element to the end of the list. Now we should have like everything should be set. And one last thing, like we also want to like clear the input box, right? Because if the user enters an item, click add, the item appears on the list. We also want the input box to be empty so that the user can start to type the second thing, right? So the way to do that is also simple. We just say document.getElementById.value is equal to an empty string. Now,
And also note that we're using the same thing twice, right? So a lot of times what you can do is just say var input field is equal to document.getElementById content, and then from there you can just access input field.value or input field.value.trim.
Yeah. So what AJ is saying is that calling getElementById is expensive because it has to travel through like the entire document to find the element with that ID. So what we can also do is we can just declare a reference to that, like content lm, and we just copy that. Now, like we're only calling getElementById once, and we can reuse that here and here. Does that make sense?
We should demonstrate the example.
So hopefully this code is correct, and let's see if it does what we want to do. Index.html. Go to school. Yep, it works. And if this is empty, it does not create any redundant node. And if we just put a bunch of space in it, it does not create a redundant node. If we say something like say hello, yes,
Is
it
this
does the same thing.
example working for everyone who is following along? Is anyone running into any issues?
Sweet. Anyone have any questions regarding this example? This is the code.
If you want to refer back to the code, or if you didn't have a chance to write it down today, you can go to do-solution, and index.js will be filled in for you.
Yeah, so we also have the solution here. Okay.
Okay, so we have about an hour left. We might not use the entire hour, but we're going to go over something called Ajax, and then we'll move on to the final project. So, how many of you guys have heard the term Ajax before? Okay, cool. So Ajax stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. It sounds like it's a mouthful, but all it is making a network request from the browser to a different server and then using the result. And the best way to see Ajax in action is any website that you probably log into or interact with. So have you guys used Facebook and Twitter before? Or even
Definitely.
like Piazza for that matter, right? So all of these websites, let's say on Facebook, when you message a friend, does Facebook refresh the page or does it just stay on the same page and send the message? It just stays on the same page, right? And even in Twitter, if you just have Twitter open, it'll fetch tweets in the background and it'll say something like load the next few tweets. And it doesn't have to refresh the page. Or even when you send a tweet, it just does it on the same page. That's because the network request is happening asynchronously. It's happening in the background and it's not blocking the user interface. And the reason, so Ajax is kind of a legacy term because in the past, the data that would be sent and retrieved were in the form of XML documents. XML is just another markup language that stores static data. In modern times, we use something called JSON as the data type, which JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. So do you guys remember the object literal syntax that we had in the beginning of the slides? It was with the curly braces and we had the key values. That's JSON. So instead of XML, we transport data back and forth using JSON syntax. So really, Ajax should be renamed Ajaj, I guess, to support modern protocols. So what we're going to do today is build the. Wait, before we do that, does anyone have a question on what Ajax is or what the purpose of it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what's awesome about Ajax is that before Ajax appears, the only way we send requests is by type, let's say google.com in the browser and hit enter. It's gonna send a GET request to the Google server, and we got a web page back. But now, if we want to send like, let's say another request, for example, I want to send a message to my friend, then without Ajax, we can't really do that. So it's Ajax that empowers like most of the web applications to like send requests to the server, receive the response, and update the page like just in time.
So
we're gonna skip this example and we'll talk briefly about the
syntax. Yeah, we can talk briefly about the syntax for using
Ajax.
Ajax. How many of you have heard the term API before? Okay, cool. So API stands for Application Programming Interface. And what it allows us to do is run a function or a method on a different server on a remote computer and then return the results. In this particular example, we're accessing the API for Open Weather Map. It's like a weather.com that has an API. And what we're doing here is that we're getting this URL, which is called an API endpoint. It's just a URL that you could have typed into the browser, but instead we're requesting it via JavaScript. And we're making a GET request in particular. So in HTTP, we have 4 major actions. And those actions are post, get, put, update. I think there's a delete, really no one uses it. But the ones that you would see the most are post and get. And then they both send data to a server, and they can both receive data back. The difference between post and get is that get is commonly used for something called idempotent operations, and what that means is that it doesn't modify any of the data at the endpoint. So, for example, we're doing a get request on weather.com with the parameter of Berkeley, and in doing so, we're not changing Berkeley's weather on the database. We're simply retrieving it. So therefore, we use a GET request. We could have made a POST request and by sending a payload of the city name, and that would have worked perfectly fine. And oftentimes, you'll see these used interchangeably to do the exact same thing. But in modern standards, GET is usually used for this sort of stuff where you're retrieving from a database, and POST is used to actually insert something into the database or change a particular value.
Okay.
And this syntax is using pure JavaScript. There are easier ways you can write this, but for the sake of this workshop, we're going to be using purely JavaScript because we know that this is supported in all major browsers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys might have heard of jQuery, right? It just kind of encapsulates this behavior. So the XML HTTP request is supported by most of the browsers. So you can just directly use it without importing or something because it's pretty fine. And we haven't really talked about object-oriented programming in JavaScript or the new keyword. But since the OOP in JavaScript is really, really different from all the other programming languages, we won't be going that. So most of the time when we are constructing objects, we'll just be using the object literal. And in this case, we use XHR equals new XML HTTP request. Now we'll have a new request object here. And what this 4-line or 5 lines does is that it just changes the onReady state change attribute of this object. Now this is a special thing because XML HTTP request objects have 2 attributes that are really important, or actually 3 of them. One of them is the ready state. So what ready state means is that if the ready state is 0, it means the request is not initialized. If it's 1, then it means server connection established. 2 means request received. 3 means processing request. And 4 means request finished and response is ready.
The one we're interested in is 4 because as soon as the request is there, we want to access it. So therefore, in that check statement, we're checking if the ready state is 4, and we're checking another important part called the status, which is 200. So when you guys have gone to a web page and you've accidentally typed the wrong URL, it gives you something called a 404 error, right? So that's an HTTP status code. That means page not found or resource not found. Likewise, there's something that you probably don't see, which is 200, which means OK. So whenever you access google.com, right, that's a 200 OK because you will most probably always retrieve google.com. And there's a lot more status codes, the ones that start with 5 have to do with internal server errors and things related to that. But in this simple example, we just want to see if the request has 1 ended and 2 it's okay, nothing's wrong with it.
Yeah. And last thing, the onReady state change property just stores a function to be called automatically each time the ready state property changes. So if we define this function, it's gonna be called by the system or by the interpreter. So you don't need to worry about like when this function will be called, but
You'll be seeing this sort of paradigm in JavaScript a lot. It's called a callback because nowhere in here are we running xhr.onReadyStateChange, right? We're just defining what it should do if it were to be called, and it's called whenever the browser's ready state is changed. And similarly, we can do something called onClick. We don't call onClick. We just say that if something is clicked, this is what it should do, and it's called whenever at any point in time.
so these
Yeah.
things are like predefined in the interpreter, and the browser just knows like when should we call this function. And whenever we have like ready state is 4 and set is 200, we'll log that out. And then what we need to do next is we open the connection, which is by specifying the method we want to use and the URL. And after that, the XML HTTP request object is ready to use, and we send the request by calling the send method. And then the request is out. And once it's back, the onReady state change will be called, and then the response text can be logged to the console.
And then a quick note on this sort of syntax. When you guys access a web page, you might see question marks in them. Do you guys know what they do? Like in the URL, you might have seen question marks when accessing a website.
URL parameters.
Yeah, exactly. So they're called URL parameters, and they're always found in GET requests because we want to tell Open Weather Map what city the weather should be, right? So the syntax is always like this. We have a URL, so http:// and then we'll have an endpoint, right? In this case, it's weather. So the endpoint is /weather. And then appending a question mark after that tells the browser, okay, everything after this is a parameter. And after the question mark, we put the parameter name, and in this case it's Q, and then we set it equal to the actual value of that parameter, which is Berkeley in this case. And you can add multiple parameters using the semicolon as long as everything comes after the Q. So if there's another parameter that said A is equal to something, we could do that. And if you access the website's API documentation, it'll tell you what parameters it accepts and what the variable names for those parameters are. So in Open Weather Maps API, they have told us that whenever you put Q, we will interpret that as a city name. And if they had a parameter called A, they would say, whenever you put A, we will interpret this as something else. So we'll be using this when we fetch images from imgear.com. Does anyone have questions on how Ajax works or what an API is? This is pretty important to understand, so if you have any doubts about it, just please ask. Okay, great. So now what we'll do is we have about 45 minutes left. We'll move on to the final project. So I think did we show the final project to like everyone?
Cool.
Okay, so I guess in case you forgot, it's this thing, cats. So you talk into it and it'll search images that correspond to this specific tag, and in this case it's cats. So before we start writing the code, we can start taking this problem apart and figuring out the different components involved in this website. Who can tell me one of the major components? Okay, one of the major components is voice recognition, right? So we do voice recognition, and do you notice that, like when I talk into this computer, it turns my voice into a piece of text, right? So the second part is to take this text and make an AJAX request to imgear.com so that it returns all the images. Once we have all the images, what do we do?
Post them on the page.
Exactly, we render them to the DOM. So there's 3 parts to this website. One is to do speech to text, then text to images, then images to the web page. And if you have, so at this point, everyone has the JS Workshop repository. Go ahead and open up mgear-voice. So there's some code that I'll go through real quick, and then we can actually start writing code. Let me just get my. Okay, cool. So does everyone have this document or this folder open? So we'll get started. Index.html, it's really similar to the previous example that TAC had with the to-do list. We have several elements with IDs defined, and I'll go over them pretty quickly. So the one that we're interested in is, or two main things. We have the button and the status text. You can ignore the things that say class. That's just CSS stuff to make it look pretty. We've already done that for you. But note that the button, it has an ID called the listen button. And it has an on click, which is toggle listen. So those are two attributes that the button has. And then we have this other element called a span, which is kind of like a paragraph tag, but it doesn't have any extra styling. It's just it's kind of like an empty element, and it just renders whatever's inside it. But for all intents and purposes, just assume that this is like a thing that displays text. But it also has an ID, which is called status text. And these things match to these elements on the web page. This is the status text. So for now, it says hit start listening to say a word. This is the button, right? And then the last part, oops. Oh yeah. And the last part is the image container. It also has the ID. Who can guess what the image container does? It holds all the images on the web page. Okay, so the HTML part's pretty boring. What we're interested in is index.js. So go ahead and open it up. I've already included some code to speed up the process. Specifically, I've included the image recognition, or not image recognition, but speech-to-text code already. But I'm going to go ahead and explain that before we move on, just so that you guys aren't confused. So do these three lines look familiar to you? So all they're doing is that they're getting the elements from our HTML, and they're setting them to variables. We do that on the top of the page on top of the file, because we want to be able to access these elements in the future. So that's clear to everyone, right? The first, this part, everyone understands what that's doing. We'll define recognition and is listening later, but they're pretty self-explanatory. Now the interesting part is this init function that I've included. Can I zoom out? Okay. Can everyone see this or follow along on their computers? Okay, great. So we've defined an init function. And this is all using like standard JavaScript syntax. And I've commented out what each of the lines do, but I'll briefly go over them. After this, we can start writing our own code. So first of all, we do something called window.webkit speech recognition. So this WebKit speech recognition is a module or object that's included in Google Chrome, not any other browsers. So Google Chrome has given us the speech-to-text functionality. We're simply checking to see if we can use it. Because you could load this file in like Internet Explorer or Firefox, right? And if they don't have speech-to-text, then the page won't work. So we alert the user saying that your browser doesn't support this technology. And we can see that. So do you have Firefox on this computer? And it's not Chrome, so it won't work. Oh yeah, and before we go further, actually I'll finish explaining this and then we can start your part. So if WebKit speech recognition is present, we create a new WebKit speech recognition object. It's similar to the way we created the new XML HTTP request object previous example. It's the same syntax. So recognition has a few different properties. I would encourage you to look into the documentation for WebKit speech recognition because it can do a lot of cool things. We're just doing something really basic. We set its property of continuous to be true. What this means is that, as you can see, like in this example, like as I'm talking, it's picking up every word until I click stop. So, so it worked, right? But if continuous was false, which is the default, it would stop as soon as I said one word. So therefore we set recognition.continuous is equal to true. Now we define two callback functions, recognition.onStart, recognition.onResult. So quick question, do we call onStart or onResult at any point in the code? No, right? The browser calls them. We simply define what to do when it is called. So the first one's easy. When recognition starts, we change status text to listening. And this is something that he was talking about. Instead of adding the text node, you can just modify the inner HTML to say listening. That's one way you could do it. It's supported on most browsers these days. And also note that status text has been defined on the top here. And it's referring to this element. So in the beginning, it says hit start listening and say a word. But once it actually does start listening, we update the user and it'll say listening. So quick example if that was unclear. As soon as we start listening, this thing will say listening ... So that's what that line of code does. Finally, we have onResult. So again, do we call onResult or is it called back for us? It's called back for us. And this time, we expect an event object to be passed in when it's called back. So what Google Chrome will do is that it'll listen to our voice, it'll do something in the background, and it'll call back recognition.onResult. And when it does call it back, it'll send in an event object. And what we do here is that this is a pretty weird object. The point is to basically retrieve something called the phrase, which is basically the text of the event. So the reason there's a loop is because Google will return multiple words that you said if there were multiple words. So if I clicked stop, start, stop, start, stop, start multiple times, it would return all of those together. But we're only interested in one instance of that. So therefore, this loop, even though it's a for loop, it would only run through it once. I've just done it this way because in case you modify this code to support that sort of behavior, you could simply cut and paste it. But here, we just care about accessing the first result and the first phrase of that result. So that's why we access dot transcript. And don't worry too much about any of the other code. Just know that onResult will return an object with the text translation inside it, and we just retrieve it.
So what's the object result index when we say event.result index?
Where? Oh yeah. So this speech recognition event, it returns this really weirdly structured object where each result is its own index. So what we want to do is we want to get the result index and then loop through that specific index. And if you look at the documentation, you can see that, but that's, I don't know, it's not really important because if you just looked at it, you could see it, right? What we care about is the fact that we retrieve this phrase string from this entire recognition thing. And if you want to look into it further, you can just Google search WebKit speech recognition, and you'll get the API documentation for that on Google. So here you can get some more details on what other capabilities it has, and they also explain what this example code does. So you can see that ours is very similar. What they're doing is that they're enabling something called interim results. So have you guys talked into Hey Google or something? Or OK Google is what it's called. Sorry. So you know how as you're talking, it'll be light gray, and then once it actually knows your word, it'll become dark gray. Those are interim results. So we chose not to do that just because it's more complicated. But this is another option. So it'll give you words that it thinks it is, and then finally it'll give you the most likely word. And the reason we access the 0th index of the result is because each result will have an array of likely words of what you said. So these are basically probabilities. So the 0th index is the phrase that has the highest probability, because the way these algorithms work is that they basically use like a bunch of math and probability to figure out what you might be saying. So Google will give you what it thinks you could have said that have a lower probability of being true. So when we access 0, we usually access the probability that has like the 97% chance or whatever. But you don't have to care about that. So if you want, you can even say like dot, I think it's called confidence. So that's another property of the result. But we care about the transcript, which is the actual string that comes out of it. Oh yeah, and then we also, so ignore this line for now, search imgur, that's what we will be implementing. But once again, we change the status text to searching once we actually run the search. And if there were no results, if the results length was actually 0, we just say that it didn't recognize it. So if we look at these steps that TAC has written, we've done the voice to text part. And I've included that for you simply because it's very trivial and it's you can just use that. Yeah, you can just use that API. So now what we want to do is the actual interesting part. Take this text and make the AJAX request to imgur.com and then render the result. So that's what this function is. Search imgur with the phrase. So this is the part that we'll be writing. So before we actually start writing code, I want to make sure that you guys can run it. And first, what we can do is open up terminal. Oh, crap. I don't know what that is.
Just change the input.
Oh, okay. We can just...
Okay.
Yeah.
It's English.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, so if you have a Mac, open up terminal. If you have Windows computer, open up command prompt. And then just navigate to that directory. So navigate into imgur-voice. If you need help doing that, just raise your hand. And I believe all of you said that you have Python installed. Is that correct? Okay, great. So Python has a built-in static web server. So we're going to run that so that we can see our code as we write it. So go ahead and type in So you're going to type in Python -m simple HTTP server. This is built-in module in Python. Make sure that both S's are capitalized and HTTP, all of it is capitalized. I'll make it a bit bigger. Oh, that didn't help, huh? Okay. So, yeah, and then go ahead and run that, and you should get something that says serving HTTP on port 8000. So, I'll give you a minute to do that. Let me know if you get any errors. If you have a new version of Python, there's a different syntax, and I can show you that. Yeah, of course. So, are you guys getting like the module not found error or something? Yeah. Okay, so the new one is called Python -m. Yeah.
Yeah, you can try that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and then Python. So for you guys, if that's the default version of Python, you just write Python. It's http.server. Oh yeah, it says address in use because we're running the new one. But for you guys, it should work.
Yep.
So
In Python version 3, it's the http.server. If it's 2.7, then it's that simple HTTP server.
yeah, I'm gonna type in both. They both aren't allowed to be listening on the same port. That's why we can't run both at the same time.
Yep.
But yeah. Is anyone else having issues with that?
Yeah, if you have like questions or a problem, you can just like raise your hands. I'll come over and help you.
Yeah. What's up? you run this? Okay. Oh, that's weird. Oh, wait, are you using Siglet? Are you using Siglet? Oh, great. Okay. Yeah. So does everyone have the server running?
Okay.
Okay. So if you have the server running,
Let me just.
you should be able to go to Google Chrome. Oh, yeah. You should be able to go to Google Chrome and then type in localhost. Oh.
Cool.
Yeah, localhost :8000, and you should get the starter template. If anyone can't see the starter template, just raise your hand. Oh.
I don't know how to use it from.
Oh, sure. So you just Oh, okay. I don't think you have Python installed.
Oh.
Wait, does she have Python 3? Oh, yeah. Well, you can definitely follow along on the JavaScript part. This is just the purpose of like actually seeing the page. But I guess since everyone's having the same code, you can just preview it on your friend's computer or something.
Okay.
But you can still write the code. That should be not an issue. But once you do get Python, you can follow the README on our GitHub, and then you can get it to run.
Okay.
Yeah, you can start downloading it, right? It's downloading it right now too. So.
Oh,
Sure. No simple HTTP.
oh,
Yeah, if you have Python 3 to HTTP.server,
So it's listening.
Python 2 and up
Open up the browser.
should be
You
HTTP.server.
should be able to see.
Are you running?
Yeah.
Okay, are you running?
So what happens after you do this?
Oh yeah, perfect. So go ahead and type in localhost :8000 into your browser. 8000. Let's see. Oh yeah, and then go into your voice. Yeah, that should be. Does everyone see this screen when you access localhost 8000?
Cool.
Anyone else having issues? She's downloading Python, but we can still. Okay, cool. So since everyone can see their code, they could start. We can start working. So it would be helpful to open up the console, just so we can see any errors that may appear as we're writing our code. And to do that, once again, click the icon on the top right, go to More Tools, and then go to Developer Tools. And you should get this. Well, I closed it, but you should get this panel below you, and you should see. There should already be an error there saying like the favicon can't be found or something. You can ignore that. The favicon is basically the little square that comes up on top, and I'm too lazy to include that, so it overwrites. But yeah, so if you have your command console open, we can start. So clicking this button, you'll get an error saying that toggle listen is not defined. Obviously, that's because we actually haven't written the toggle listen function. What we can do is that since the init function is already defined, the initialize function, we can run it at the end of the code. It won't do anything just yet, but we can just initialize it. You won't see a result of it, but just make sure that it's included at the end of your code. Okay, great. So is everyone has the code up and running on localhost, right? So we can move on. And you've copied init down. And if at any point you lose me while I'm writing the code, I'll try to go slowly, but if you do lose me, you can go to the solution and then go to index.js, and the final code will be there. Cool. So the function that we're interested in is search imgear, right? And that's not defined right now, so let's write it.
Should we write the toggle listen first, since it's sequential?
The what?
Toggle listen, should we write that first?
Oh, yeah, we could write that. Yeah, sure. We can also write toggle listener first. So he's referring to this on click because, yeah, that's a better idea actually. So when we click it right now, toggle listen is not defined. So let's actually write it. So function toggle listen. So if you've been programming UI interfaces, a toggle is a very has the same pattern across like any device you're programming for. You have you check if something you want to be happening is already happening, and then do the opposite, and then vice versa. And in code, that just looks like if is listening, recognition dot stop, and we set is listening equal to false, because now since we've stopped the listening, we update the flag. And then finally, we change the listen buttons dot inner HTML to start listening. And these variables aren't magic, they're defined on top. So recognition is defined here as the WebKit speech recognition, and is listening, as soon as the page loads, it's not listening, so it starts out to be false. So,
Quick question.
yeah, of course.
So we have class lists.
What?
We have a class list.
Um,
Each of the elements, like if listen button, that's a class.
oh, yeah. So if you go back to the,
Well, actually, we get in the console. If you just you can type
Oh,
listen
yeah.
button class list.
so you would actually,
So I'm saying if in the console, type listen button class list.
right.
If you wanted to change it to like the standard bootstrap warn,
Yeah, you could do that.
but if you try doing that with an assignment, it won't update it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
You say, should you class list of warn like that? Warn, you want to change button primary to button warn.
Oh, okay. That's weird.
So I don't know why it's...
I think class list might be read-only.
Then should it throw in
Try
here?
log out
It should.
classes again.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's most probably read-only. I think that's something that the browser like stops you from doing.
I guess like it provides like a separate API to do that. It's
Yeah.
slightly different
Right,
from.
but shouldn't it throw like a undefined or a none? It's not providing that output, so it's not clear to the user that you can't do
Right.
that.
You can actually Google like class list, like
So I guess this is the temporary solution. You could do that, and that doesn't work either.
wait, let me see.
Oh, that dot class, right? Okay, yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think
Oh,
it's
okay.
defined like
Oh, there it is. You can add.
Yeah, so like they provide separate APIs for add, contains, remove, toggle, things like that. So you can't really change it as like an array.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's good that you brought this up because it's actually a common issue in JavaScript because it seems as though you could just modify it, but most APIs have like getters and setters.
Yeah,
So,
so like
Just refer to the
JavaScript-
documentation.
JavaScript object can have like setters and getters. Like sometimes a key is not modifiable. If you try to assign value to that key, it just does nothing. Like it does not throw error, it doesn't tell you anything, it just does nothing. Which is like kind of a bad design, but this is what it is. So oh, forget it. Equal.
Oh yeah. So this should change it to like a red button. Oh,
But if you try to remove it, just
Does not support chain.
Huh? Is it just Chrome? Oh yeah, so that's been removed.
Okay, so
Okay, wait. We'll just move on with the actual tutorial.
Yeah.
We'll help you after the lesson is over. That's interesting, actually.
Mhm.
Because most of the time we just access it via style attribute, not class. Okay. Anyway, so once again, if it is listening and it's clicked, we stop it from listening. And if it's not listening, we have to start listening, right? So we do the complete opposite of this code. So recognition.start and is listening is now true. And then we update the user saying listen button dot inner HTML is equal to stop listening. And then we can go ahead and try it.
Wait.
Oh
Just
yeah,
wait.
yeah. Sorry.
Everyone got that code?
Okay, so if we go ahead and try it, we should get something that says localhost wants to use your microphone. That's because recognition.start is starting WebKit speech recognition, and WebKit speech recognition wants to ask for your permission so that you can use your microphone. So if you ever used like some calling program or video chat program that runs on the web, you'll get a similar alert saying like localhost or the website wants to use your webcam or something, and that's a security feature. Yeah. So does everyone have this code copied down?
You can also like look at the solution folder, like there's that complete code, just in case if you didn't follow along.
Yeah. And does anyone have any questions on what this code does? Make sure you like ask if you're confused about anything. Okay, cool. We'll move on. So here we have a function that says recognition.onStart, right? And this function isn't going to run until you allow it to use your microphone. So as you can see, it still says hit start listening to say a word. It hasn't changed to listening yet. So once we click allow, it'll change to listening. And what that tells us is that recognition.onStart, that callback function has been in fact called. And we can say something test stop listening, and it does nothing because we haven't defined the next part yet. So go ahead and refresh the page so that we can work on the next part. Yeah. So is that button working for everyone right now? Cool. Just refresh the web page so that once we add some new code, it'll get updated. Great. So the last function that we're going to implement, or we have two functions that we're going to implement, which is search imgear and success handler. So where in the code is search imgear called? It's after we get the phrase, right? So if we follow the pattern of things that we're doing, we're at the part where we do the AJAX to imgear. And let's make this request. So let's implement function search imgear. And what should the parameter be? The phrase, exactly. So search imgear takes the parameter phrase. And this next part should look very familiar. So we create a new request, imgear request is equal to new XML HTTP request. And who remembers what we have to do to this request object before we send it? We have to add a callback, right? And the callback is called onReadyStateChange. So imgear request.onReadyStateChange is equal to function. And what do we have to check for when a ready state is changed? We have to check for its actual ready state and if it's successful. So we have an if condition saying if imgear request.readyState is equal to 4, and if imgur request dot status is equal to 200, then we can move on. So now that the request has come back successfully, we have to access the data that imgur has sent back. So what is the data that we expect? We're expecting some images back, right? Because that's what we have to show to the user. So let's get that data. So we create a new variable var imgur response is equal to imgur request dot response dot data. So this is the data that the server has sent back to us.
Now in the previous example, we are using like imgur request.response text. We are treating it as a string. And in this case, because imgur request is sending us back data as a JSON object, so the browser is going to automatically parse that JSON object and it's going to put that under imgur request.response. So this thing will return to us a JavaScript object that we can work with. And as for what attributes are defined in this object, those things are specified in like the imgur image like searching API documentation. So they should tell us like you should expect like the .data thing to come back.
So now we have to make sure that it actually sends some data back, right? Because now all we know is that the HTTP request is done and it was successful. But successful could mean that it's returned some empty array of images, right? So we simply do a check saying if imgur response.length is greater than 0, and then else we don't do something else. So here we once again update the user saying that the status text.innerHTML is equal to showing results for whatever we searched for. And remember that in JavaScript you can concatenate strings using the plus. Oh yeah, make sure you add the equals. And then here we can add a comment saying that we have to render the data on the page. If the length was in fact 0, we should tell the user that there were no results found for their specified phrase. Okay?
So at this step, like the first two steps, voice to text and Ajax to imgur is done. And all we need to do next is render the results to HTML DOM. And we already know like how to do that.
Yeah. So before we actually render the data, let's see what it looks like. Let's see what imgur actually sent back to us. How do we print in JavaScript?
Anyone remembers like how to print?
You mean the console? So
Yeah, console.log. So let's console.log imgur response. So we've prepared the onReady state change. Now we actually have to make the request, right? So we do imgur request.open get. And remember the weather API example. We're getting images, so that's why we use the get action. And then we type in the URL for this endpoint, which is https://api.imgur.com/3/gallery/search. And then it also takes a query parameter called q. And in our case, what's that query parameter equal to? It's phrase, because we're searching for a word on the imgur API.
Like this is something also defined on the imgur API documentation. Like how should you send the request, and like they will tell you that you should put like a question mark q equals and the string you want to search.
Okay, so now we do something that we haven't seen before, but it's not very important. We do something called set request header, and then give it author So this has authorization, and then client-id. You can cut and paste this line from the solution, actually. So if you can just cut and paste that. I'll briefly go over what it does, but it's not of interest. What happens is that some APIs, they have to protect themselves against DDoS attacks, right? Because I could just request images all day long infinitely, and their servers would go down. So what they have to do is verify that the person accessing their API is who they say they are. So therefore, before this tutorial, I registered something called a client ID with Imgur, and they gave me this special string. So Imgur server says that whoever has this special string may request our server, and only then will we return things back. And that's called the client ID. And if you go on our GitHub, and if you go to the Imgur solution project, we have steps on how to get your own client ID. But luckily, like, this can be reused. So you can just cut and paste this, and you can use it for yourself. In the future, you can create your own, and we have instructions on how to do that. And this is a common pattern in different APIs, especially those that are more popular, because they're prone to attacks and downtimes. So that's what that line does. It's not too important. Now, finally, what we do is we say that the response type is equal to JSON. So if you go on the Imgur API docs, which I'll show you at the end, they say that all of the data will come back in the format JSON. And if we're expecting XML, we would put XML. But that's rarely the case. So after specifying the header and the response type, we finally just send the request. So as a review, what happens after the request is sent? Or what function is called, perhaps? So after the request is changed, at some point in time, when the server decides to respond, onReadyStateChange will be called. And we've already defined what will happen when it's called. So if our code works, what will happen is that in the console, we'll get the data that Imgur has sent back. So yeah, let's try it out. First, open your console so that we can see the result. Refresh it just to make sure you don't have any errors to begin with. And we'll see if we copy the code down correctly. So hit start listening. You should see the allow thing again. Dogs. Stop listening. And in our console, we get a ton of objects. So this is an array of all the images that Imgur has sent back to us. I'm going to pause at this point just to make sure this works for everyone, because only then can we move on. So I guess, like, don't feel bad about talking into your computer. Just try it out and see if it works.
Yep.
Yes.
Do we have like questions or problems or something not working? And by the way, like the main reason that we really need to have like a Python static server running like at the back end to serve this page is that Google Chrome like does not allow the file you open from your disk to like send AJAX request. So we will really need to like host this web page to allow like AJAX requests.
And that's called a cross-origin request.
Yep.
So yeah, let's just make sure. Is it working for everyone? Are you? If you open your console, do you get? Let's see. Open your console. So go to your and then open your console. Yeah. And then go to or just click on here. No, there. No, the actual error. Yeah. Okay, cool. It says toggle listening and for some reason. Go back. Yeah. There you
That's why.
go. Is it working for you guys?
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, try it again. It should work. Is it working for you?
Cool.
Okay. Let me know if you run into any problem. Is it working for you?
Success and not
Okay.
fine.
Refresh the page. You might have to like speak into your microphone or speak louder. Just refresh the page.
Hello?
Is it working for you?
It's so unless it does, just it shows.
Yeah, that's perfect. So in your console, you should just get a bunch of objects. So make sure you have our console open to see what's going on. Yep.
What is this? Is it? Is it
Oh, okay, interesting.
Test server.
Search your or refresh it.
My
Where's the
cat.
Okay, that's probably because you haven't added the console.log.
is it Python 2?
Oh, you have. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe like try to open this thing. Oh.
No, you need to run the script.
Yes.
So another thing you can do in Chrome is to actually see the requests that are going on.
Okay.
So let's see if that Ajax request was actually made. So hold on. Test. Okay, so it looks like
Maybe like try to search.
request was made.
Run.
Okay, yeah, so something did come up, but I think search in there.
You probably don't have Python executable on your path. The path status under Windows it may vary, so
Let me just double check the solution.
how to add Python onto Windows path. This looks useful.
Because if the callback is the same
on
thing,
that.
where there's a typo.
System from the control panel will assess
I
the
don't know if
environment
there's-
variable, find
Test.
path and edit it.
Okay, so that's fine.
That's super annoying. Okay. I hope that.
Let's see if search.
Yeah.
Python.
It's a little hard to like get things
Let's
working.
just see. Let's just cut and paste
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
It's the same exact thing.
It's like CMD is so different from like terminal or Bash.
There, you can try.
Nice.
If I get
Wow.
400 bad request.
I was expecting that.
There it is.
Oh,
Did you?
We're here to find
Oh
something.
my.
That's
Yeah,
great.
you put it.
Oh,
You might have just had like a small typo or something.
so you are running.
If you want, you can like control Z.
Such an axe.
yeah.
Here's Doge.
Just once. So you should get it.
Local
If this doesn't work, then yeah.
How many
Text.
objects?
Okay, that works.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess.
Hello.
If you're curious,
51 results, but I think even the
Okay,
just
so
control Z.
Yeah,
Two
sure.
things.
Okay.
Yeah.
400.
Is it working for you?
Did
Let's check.
I don't
Or some
know.
things.
I feel like we're gonna hear. So I think they specified under 100.
Oh.
Are you so if you
How
have,
many results?
Did
you
you
might have made like a
copy
small
this?
before. What you could try is
Four.
what's your
Or
what you could do is if you can just cut and
usually it's
paste
not
the
like 400. Maybe
Donald
let's try
search
copy
in
that.
your function
Oh,
from
God.
the solution, and then you can basically compare it to online documents.
Oh,
Okay, but yeah, thank you. Hey,
Recognition don't start in recognition, don't stop
Oh,
But that wasn't.
like stage GPS.
Correct.
That could be the problem.
oh, did you run in it?
Let's see if it
At
works.
the bottom of the file?
Oh,
Yeah.
just close it out.
Yeah, so the speech stuff.
Okay, there's two. It's so slow. It's so much memory.
Cats.
Awesome.
Try again. Quick refresh. And it's click it again. Oh, because you missed you had a space there. Or you should have a space there. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Right. And then scroll down all the way to top of this thing. Okay, yeah, try it now.
Hello. Hello.
Oh yeah, I think you just had a few like typos here and there. If you want, you can go to the solution and then like cut and paste this function if you want to speed it up. Or you can see what the code should look like and then see if you made any typos. So make sure you. Yeah. So scroll down. Okay. Yeah. Good idea. Just search the actual.
Everyone gets it.
Yeah. Who isn't it working for? So I know that. So you're having a small issue, but you're fixing it. It's working for everyone else. Great. Is it working for you?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. It's working for you guys. Did you get it figured out? Did you get it figured out? Did you get it?
Yeah, so the problem I coded, I just did if and get a response.
Okay. Yeah, so that's because in your response does have data,
Okay.
but we have to check if its length is greater than 0. So in your response will always be a true E value,
Okay.
because it contains other stuff like status code and things like that. It's not an empty file,
Okay.
but we have to specifically check if the data object is empty or not.
Okay.
So that's why.
Okay.
Cool. Shall we?
Alright, is everyone ready to move on? Sorry we're a bit over time. The last function is like really simple. We just have to like throw it on the page. Okay, so if
Talk a little bit.
yeah. So as you can see, this is the JSON object that came back. It's an array of these values. So we can see the different data that comes for each object. For example, account URL. So the uploader's name was like tree snippety or something. And then we can see other details about this image object, like how many comments it has. What we're interested in is the link. Because what we can do now is we can display this link on our web page in the form of an image, right? So if you want, you can cut and paste this link onto your browser. Hopefully it's nothing bad. Okay, and then it's like a GIF, right? So what we're interested in, that's cool. Okay. So what we're interested in is like basically rendering a grid of these things and set the image's source to the link of the image that we've gotten. So does anyone have any questions on the process of making a request and then looking at the response, what we've done so far essentially? And most of you have it working, and those of you who don't have it working are figuring it out. Okay, cool. But yeah, if you're like stuck at this point, I would just advise you to like cut and paste those functions from the solution, because most likely you've just made a typo. If you've gotten this far, there shouldn't be anything else wrong with it. But yeah, so we'll write the last function and then finish up this workshop. So here, instead of console.log, we say that we have to render the data on the page, right? So we'll call this function the success handler, and then send the mgear response. The mgear response. So the success handler will be run whenever we have successful. Whenever the response is successful and it's greater than 0. So let's define the success handler function and make sure it's called in this part of the onReadyState change function. And the argument is the data. So now, now what we have to do is first clear the image container, because if we search twice, we don't want it to append the next result to it. So we just do image container, or image container dot inner HTML is equal to empty. So we just clear it, and then now what we do is loop through every image that Imgur has given us, and then create an image element for that. So now what we do is for var I is equal to 0, I is less than data.length, I is I++, we check if the data has a attribute called type. That lets us know that it's an image, not an album, because Imgur will return different data types. The data that has the type attribute is an image, so the type would be like JPEG or GIF or something, but the other ones don't have that. And then we also do a check to see if the data is flagged as not safe for work, because we don't want to render like inappropriate content. So, and then this is something that the Imgur response will return. So one of these properties is like NSFW. So this specific one is false. So we simply access that. So if all of these conditions are true, then we can go ahead and render it on the page. So first, we create a new image element. So var image equals new image.
You can use like the new keyword, or you can just use like document.create element that
Yeah.
like, we learned about previously.
So we set the attribute of its class to Imgur image. Don't worry about this line of code because we've already defined the CSS styles for you. All it's saying is that its class is this specific thing. You don't have to worry about this line, but what's actually important is the image.src, the source of the image, is the source of the data, or the link of the data. So if you saw the data type before, you would see that it has a attribute called link, and we have to set the image element's source to that link. So we simply say image.source is equal to data I of data.link. Finally, we render this on the page by saying image container.append child image. And this is very similar to the to-do example because we're creating an element in JavaScript and then appending it to an existing element so that it shows up on the page. So I'll wait for a second so that you guys have the success handler copied down. You can always go back to the solution.
Question?
Yeah, what's up?
So I found unexpected output. This in not the same in I'm used to.
Oh yeah, so this particular syntax will check if the recent searches list 0 has the property chicken, and the image object doesn't have the property chicken.
No, this is a text. So my recent search is here, and I'm obviously pushing chicken because the other ones are display. So
Right.
I have a data array called recent search list. And all I'm asking is
Oh no, you can't. So the end keyword is reserved to checking properties. Yeah, well not types, but checking properties of an object.
okay.
Yeah, you can't check if it's an
String.
array like in Python.
Okay.
So in JavaScript, you would actually have to like filter the array, yeah, or use the filter parameter.
What's filter parameter?
So here, just look up array.filter and you can. Filter. Well, it takes in another function. Let me just look that up for you. Array.filter JavaScript. Yeah. Here.
Hello.
Function attests each element return true to filter provides.
Is the limit needs to
the attributes of one possibility.
Except this would work in
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, and so index of is the actual search thing. So what you have to do is check if the index of is not -1. So -1 means that it's not found in the array. Whereas if you actually get a number back, that means it'll give you the index of it. So no, it's like, so you have to do this. So if you do, so your argument would just be checking.
Wait, is it just ready state or is it everything?
Everything.
Yeah, it is. Always capitals. So that means chicken was in the 0th element. But if you run this again, and then
They've been checking and it'll
Check.
put -1.
it'll put -1 because, yeah, so whenever you do the index of function, you will always see if index of something is not -1. Then that'll check if it's not there. Did you get Python installed, by the way?
Yeah, but I don't know how to access it anyway.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. Are you following along with it though?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So once you get Python installed, you can simply run the local static server.
Oh no, it's installed. I just don't know how to access it.
Oh,
Like,
okay.
The path is not.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Python
Is
looks
there
actually
any way to
has
install the attributes?
Python set path.
Oh, it'd be like,
So
just like list what it has. Like,
dude, yeah, this has like really clear step-by-step instruction how to do this, but
hello?
in this sense, what you do is you go to.
That's crazy. So
You
it's
go to-
undefined out here, but it's undefined in here, but outside is
Double.
And you go to environment variables,
That's
and
really
then
like-
here you would append.
Wait,
So you would find the location of where Python is installed,
so
and then you would put semicolon, and then you would just type in the path of your Python directory. So
okay.
you would have to just find where it would go installed and add the absolute path to that.
Okay.
Oh yeah, we should have that. Okay, yeah. Sorry we went like 15 minutes over time, but thank you all for coming. We hope you learned something. As always, the code is like the finished code, in case you didn't get it all down, is in the Git repository, and the link to the slides is on the Facebook group and in the Git repository. Yeah, if you have any questions, you can find our contact information on Facebook.
So guys, thanks for coming. Yeah, and I guess that's the end of the workshop. If you have like separate questions, you can stay and ask as well.
Yeah,
Try our
we'll be here
best if we have
for
time
like
for you.
a few minutes if you have any specific questions.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for coming.
Let's stop that.